cover today, background, which you all have some background on this already, and then developing your pandemic plan as part of your emergency response plan, how you deal with your staff and employees, and ultimately your customers, and then maybe what to look forward to for the next month or two to the extent that I can prognosticate that. First disclaimer, as you see on the screen, this is my license to practice medicine in the state of Ohio, but actually it's not. That's my professional engineer's license. I'm not a physician. I don't know very much about the coronavirus other than what I read in the Wall Street Journal and the Dispatch and on the internet. So keep that in mind, but I can tell you it's very fast moving. Here's the background in China were developed. You know, the first reported cases of pneumonia were December 31st, and within about 10 days they had announced this outbreak, and then China was on total lockdown by the 23rd, so just a couple weeks later. And again, I'm from Ohio, and I'm going to give you our quick background on this. For us, you know, we've kind of been watching it, but it started getting real when the governor canceled spectators and the expo for the Arnold Festival. It's the largest kind of bodybuilding conference expose in the world. If you could see me, you'd know that I've never been to the Arnold as a contestant or even a fan, but it is a really big moneymaker for the Central Ohio area. It's the biggest in the world, and it brings people from all around the world. But even a week prior to us having our first official COVID case in Ohio, the governor shut that down. And then pretty quickly thereafter, things moved to the same day we had our first official report. The Ohio State University canceled classes, along with some other universities. We have our son from Kent State got sent home to us. Just a few days later, all the sports were canceled, the NCAA tournament, the NBA, and all the schools were shuttered down here in Ohio. A couple days later, all the restaurants and bars. And then within another week, we had the stay home order here in Ohio, and just a couple days after that, over half the country's under that. Now I think it's almost everyone. So moving on to a pandemic plan, how you deal with that on the water side. First thing we're going to do is we're going to have our first WebEx poll. Paul, do you want to say anything on this?
Yeah, so this is just another quick tutorial, quick shot of how that works. Hopefully, again, I did get some people chatting with us, so that's great. Ideally, then the questions are going to appear on the main screen here, and then when we launch the poll, we'll be able to have you engage with answering that poll. So you just give me a few seconds here. I'm going to go ahead and get that popped up and get it launched. So I would go ahead and again, you just then take the answers over to the right. It's going to be an A, B, or C multiple choice. And then if you hit submit, that's just how to get the poll activated from your side. And then we'll be able to take that from here. And I'm going to go ahead and open up the first panel. So Glenn, go ahead and jump into the panel questions just so people kind of know what we're going to be asking here. And just give me a second. I will get this launched. Just moments. Okay, so hold on. I apologize, guys. That's kind of just got a little technical difficulty, but I will get through it. So just give me a sec.
So while Paul's working on that, you can see that the question has to do with whether you had a pandemic response plan included in maybe your emergency response plans prior to January 2020. If you had one fully implemented or fully ready to implement, answer B, A, well prepared. If you kind of had a few thoughts on it, semi-prepared, and then C would be not at all. We ready here, Paul?
Yep, perfect. Thanks, Glenn. I appreciate you catching me a few seconds there. So the poll is now open. Again, over to your right, you should see the WebEx polling option of answering A, B, C, or D. If you hit that and hit submit, it looks like we are getting some activity. So again, I appreciate you guys participating. I think this is just going to be good to kind of know where everyone else is at, where they're coming from, and everyone who's attending today. Again, I apologize about that small delay there. We'll close this poll in just a few moments. Looks like, again, we've got a pretty good high engagement. If you can just see the answers over to the right, hit A, B, C, or D, and then hit submit. The polling will close here in about 10 seconds, and then I'll be able to just kind of share some of the results of where people are at. All right, so poll results, I'm going to apply. Okay, so it looks like only one person has said that we're all prepared. We have about 22 people saying they are semi-prepared. That's about 38%. And then we've got about 24% are saying that are not prepared at all. We did have some no answers, which is completely fine, but definitely looks like the majority showing at 38% semi-prepared and 2% well-prepared, and we have 24% not prepared at all. So thanks again, everybody, and Glenn, go ahead and take away.
Yeah, so no worries on that. You're in very good company here. So here's Delco's emergency response plan. As you can see, between item number 4 and 5 is our coronavirus plan, but actually it's not, right? As an experienced utility executive who was around when the swine flu came out, I knew exactly what you had to do when this kind of thing came on, and I was watching it. And that's, you put a couple of bottles of hand sanitizer where your customers come in at the customer counter, and that kind of alleviates the concerns of your staff and them, and problem solved, right? Well, not so much. We did not have a pandemic plan in our emergency response plan either, and I think you'd find most utilities did, maybe some of the very, very bigger ones. So we started working on one on the fly. Did take some guidance as we put into that, but just some of the measures that you typically see when the guidance is, obviously first cancel and reschedule all your events. You find a way to get your sick employees isolated from the rest, if you have any, and also those that have been anywhere that they could have been exposed to it, or if they've got a family member that appears to be sick. Got to teach people how to wash their hands again. That disinfection, kind of all these best practices that you've been hearing about everywhere you turn anymore, right? There's a recommendation to select a pandemic coordinator who, in our case, Jeff Kaufman's doing that for us, and every day he's, watching the updates from the governor and from the president and keeping track of all the rules as they come forward. You need to establish communications with your key partners, such as your emergency management agency, the health department, if you have a warrant in your state, which probably most states do, probably almost all of them. This is a big one, your supply chain, right? Make sure you're going to be able to continue to get the products that it takes for you to treat water, your electric, your fuel, your chemicals, and top them all off as regularly as possible in case there should be any disruption to that supply chain. You're able to keep getting those vital resource that it takes for you to operate your utility. Establish tiers of services, right? Most essential, obviously, in the water is treatment along with distribution. You need to treat the water and be able to get it to your people. So for distribution, it also means repairing the system. And second tier is IT to run your SCADA and all your other computer systems. And you see some other things on there too. I won't go read through the entire part of the slide. Your essential personnel, and typically this pretty much mirrors exactly what you consider your essential services. And you need to be prepared to shut down those less essential operations, such as billing and metering. You may just need to shut those off at some point if this thing goes on long enough. Identify your critical customers. Make sure you consider that and consider what kind of critical pipelines and valves you have in order to serve your hospitals, nursing homes, et cetera, that are on your system. Close facilities to the public, cancel any meetings. Limit or cancel business travel, and even consider restricting personnel travel. So in our case, I was getting ready to announce to our staff that there's going to be no out-of-state travel allowed without specific permission from the general manager. And just the day before that meeting was to be held, the governor ended up putting the stay-home order. So he did it for me, thank goodness, because some people might think they had a pretty big restriction of their rights, that their boss is telling them that they can't travel out of state. But that's where we were at that point. So you at least have to consider that. Eliminate direct contact and that social distancing. Again, those are all things that you hear all the time. Implement work from home practices. You need to remove at-risk populations And I realize this is easy for me to say. I have 100 employees here at Delco Water. Some of you may only have a few, but if you got somebody that's sufficiently aged to be at risk, and at least for this particular pandemic, that's one of the big issues. Also, things like diabetes and kind of heart disease. You really have to think about just taking them out and moving them off-site. Now, if they can be productive from off-site, that's great, but you really need to start thinking of getting rid of those at-risk populations from amongst your staff. Our IT department did a wonderful job in very short order spinning up the ability for us to do telecommuting. We had a great continuity of operation plan. If something happened to our facilities here, we could take our staff and we could move them off-site. IT could set up, the network elsewhere in one of our other buildings or in some other third-party building. However, we really weren't too prepared to send everybody home. So in very short order, our IT department was able to identify that and figure out how to work through those situations. You need to reduce employees in the office, and you need to isolate critical employees. So obviously that's treatment plant operators, but there's other stuff too. In our case, we don't have a whole lot of qualified electricians, and we had one or two were part of that at risk. So we've gone ahead and isolated all of them to make sure that we have somebody that can respond in the case of an emergency repair. The thermometers that you see on there, that's screening anyone entering your campus and facilities. And at this point, you should be doing that for your employees on a regular basis. In our case, the thermometers are not available for purchase right now, so we're asking everybody to go ahead and take their temperature before they come into work each day. Preventative side, yes.
Yeah, I just had a quick question come through just regarding about Delco in particular. How many people make up Delco's IT department was a question that just came through.
We have about 5. We have one person that specializes in telephones. He's been on board, and we're fortunate to have implemented a new ShoreTel system here in the last couple of years, and we're able to do a pretty good job of just having those calls forwarded on. We've got a couple folks that are pretty strong on the hardware side and the application side, but it's still fairly small staff when you think the side of our organization, and they've just done a yeoman's job getting us set up to be able to work from home, and we have a significant number of our staff working from home regularly. And then so that's the answer to that question, and that kind of leads into some of these other things. We're staggering shifts to reduce cross-contamination. So talking like the distribution department, half of them are working, on a Monday, and the other half come in and they work the Tuesday, and then that squad A comes back on the Wednesday, and so on and so forth. And we're doing the same thing with the executive team. Our chief operating officer and myself, we alternate days, so we're trying to make sure that we're not on site at the same time. So if one of us has the need to go into quarantine or becomes actually sick with the virus, the other one is still available there to help lead the company. So you need to also build redundancy in staff, right? So if you only have 1 or 2 people that could sign checks or approve payroll, what happens if one of them goes down? You need to figure that out ahead of time. On the field, you also need to switch to single occupancy vehicles. We're no longer going to go out as teams in a vehicle, and we've stopped doing any what I'd call invasive work. We're not going to turn a large valve in a transmission line as part of our valve turning program just in case it should lock close. We're going to be very intelligent about what kind of work we're doing to make sure we won't make any more problems for ourselves. And we're no longer entering homes or dwellings under almost any condition. And then ultimately, if someone does come down with COVID on your staff or whatever pandemic's coming along, you need to have somebody that's really professional at decontamination ready to come in and disinfect your facility so you can continue to work out of it if need be. Moving on to how you address your employees and your board. Communication, obviously, just it's a challenging time, and that is included for your staff and the general public too. So you need to communicate the plan regularly, what you're doing. Obviously, we talked about telecommuting already. Track employee health. Our HR coordinator, every single day, he's putting together a spreadsheet about who's working from where, whether working from home or on-site, those type of things. And also what kind of health challenges that we're having. Those are kept separate, under HIPAA guidelines, but every single day we kind of understand who could be potentially at risk, what kind of challenges we have going on. I already mentioned the public contact. The hardship issues, if someone has children these days, they no longer have school to send them to, so you may have to deal with finding ways for them to work from home or something along that line. So on the 13th, just as this thing was creeping up, we did have an all-staff meeting in the back, and one of the things we communicated to them, this is going to probably be our last in-person staff meeting we're going to have for quite a while. And just a little bit over a week later, we actually, for the first time, held our first virtual staff meeting using Microsoft Teams. I do have a few slides in there of what we communicated to staff to share with you. I kind of taught them how to use the thing on their smartphones, how they could chat in. So we had about 73 or 74 different people enter this, and it covered about 85, 90 people total. The two biggest questions that your staff want to know is anyone sick right now with it? And then, are we going to get paid? Those are the two big questions. So be prepared to answer those. Obviously you can't tell them if any particular person is exposed, other than what the Board of Health maybe allows you to do, but certainly you could tell them if you think you've got a concern on your campus. And then we just talked to them about some of the big picture stuff going on in case they weren't keeping up to speed. This is from the New York Times, and on the left you see with none of these control measures that close to 100% of the population would have this thing by July 1st, and with the strict measures, you can hold it under 10%. I would say that our governor, although he's done a wonderful job with reacting to the coronavirus issue, he typically isn't a real inspirational speaker, but I did share this thing with him. He did inspire him with one of his comments that he made a couple weeks back. And he says, at the end of each day, did I do everything I could that day to defeat this enemy, to slow it down, to do everything I could to save lives? And to me, that told me he was kind of laser focused on the ultimate goal. Now, he has a lot of tactics, a lot of challenges to deal with, the economy and unemployment and everything else that's associated with this. But he was very focused on his primary task. And then I relayed that out to our staff. Well, our primary task here, and my goal as the general manager, is for us to be able to continue to serve our purpose, to supply water, one of life's most vital resources, to our members and customers. So all the decisions that we're making, and all the decisions you need to make as utility employees and managers, is to make sure that you continue to treat water and distribute water to your customers today, and then tomorrow, and a week from now, and a month from now. That's first and foremost, is they need us more now than they ever do with what's going on with the health of our regions. And then we just kind of went them through and told them what we were doing with the various different departments. We're splitting up our distribution and maintenance into 2 squads, and we're isolating our plants and doing the non-invasive work, working on the telecommuting and all those type of things, separating the roles. And one thing we had to stress with them, I was getting a little reports from our distribution superintendent, is that we're splitting them up into separate trucks, but then sometimes they're coming home or coming back to the office and having lunch together in the staff room. And we said, no, that can't continue. This has got a long incubation period. It could be up to 2 weeks after you have it before you actually realize it. And that whole time you could be contagious. So we were very clear that you need to act as if you have it or that your coworker has the COVID virus. That's the way you act every day in your association with each other. And if you act that way, then you'll be providing the proper, prudent amount of actions. We talked about caring for dependents already a little bit, but if the schools are closed, you have young parents who are going to have to deal with that. Cleaning supplies. You can see this is obviously from a Walmart pre-coronavirus here. The store shelves are stocked, but you need to do your absolute best to make these supplies available. Obviously, there's a huge concern across the country for the healthcare workers getting some of their PPE, and this is our PPE right now for the general public and for our utility employees. We need to get them cleaning supplies. And then the other thing we have to think about is for future escalations. If this thing continues to get worse and continues to go on for a long time, there's a possibility we might have to sequester our treatment plant operators like they're doing in the San Diego area. They actually have campers on site, and they have people that are staying there for 3 or 4 weeks at a time, kind of splitting shifts, and other ones staying in the camper so that they can continue to treat water. We're talking about switching. We haven't done so yet, but going to 12-hour shifts if there's only 2 people in the plant on a daily basis. Again, that's something that we're keeping in our toolkit maybe even reducing reducing hours of the treatment plant operations. Typically, we run our Class 4 plants 24 hours a day, but if we had to, we could utilize some of the storage in our clear wheels and maybe cut those down to a single 15-hour shift or something like that in order to be able to just limit the amount of people that we need in order to continue to staff these plants. One thing we're able to offer for our employees is free teledoc for a 90-day period. The company was just willing to go ahead and pay the co-pays and the total cost of this service so that they have the ability to call a doctor and talk to them about issues without having to go into the doctor's office and possibly expose themselves to whatever is going around in that office. And ultimately, just the high anxiety we have throughout society, that is very true on your staff too, so it's important that you keep calm and to continue to communicate with them. So the governing board, you have to keep them informed, keep them involved to the extent that you're able to. You're probably going to have to come up with alternative meeting strategies. And for those of you who are subdivisions of the state, you have to be aware of the Sunshine Law, public law violations. And one other thing I'd say is do a practice run. Actually, just yesterday, we used the same technology with our board of directors to do kind of a preliminary meeting leading up to our future board meeting coming up later this month. We used the same technology that we did very successfully with our staff meeting when we had 75 people chime in. Well, it failed utterly with the board last night. So we're going to do a couple more practice runs to make sure that we can actually host a board meeting virtually later this month. So moving on to customer relations, obviously a huge issue through this. The general public, I put it here as high anxiety too, right? State of shock and fear. So what you see up there posted is a next door post where somebody pulled in to our local Menards over here, ran in with a getaway car sitting out front, ran in and stole 2 cases of toilet paper, jumped in their car and drove away. I think they had a limit on how much you could buy. But, I've had some staff members say this, it's like going to Black Friday, the way people are hoarding things and how they're acting. But the difference here is that's greed that's inspiring them, and in this particular instance, it's fear. So it's much, much worse, much, much more challenging. And just we have to keep calm in running our companies so that, the utilities are so important to deal with what's going on out in the general public. The layoffs that are going on everywhere and the stock market crashes. In Ohio, it's law now. We reacted, and almost all the utilities reacted way before it became law, but right now it's law that you cannot shut off any water service for non-payment, and further, you have to turn anyone on that's been shut off dated back to January 1st, and something that we offered pretty early on, proactively, and we've seen that with almost all the other ones in our community. Delco was able to go a step further with this. We developed this hardship program so that any customer can, if they fill out an application, we'd be willing to forgive a $50, up to $50 per month per account if they had a particular hardship associated with COVID, such as they were laid off. Now, obviously, that's not easy for everyone to do. We had an extremely strong 2019, so we're able to kind of share back some of the members' money back to them that are having a hardship now. I would say this is a great opportunity to engage customers and gain goodwill if you're able to do something like that, but I know not everyone is able to. We're certainly not the only ones. The city of Westerville, which is municipal government right here close to us, in the month of April, they've decided not to bill at all for water, for sewer, for solid waste, or electric. The aggregate cost of a month's worth of non-billing is about $5.5 million. So some folks are going to quite an extreme to deal with the situation. The rest of you that maybe don't have the resources to do that, you need to think about some kind of payment plans. How are we going to get ourselves back out of this situation? I've done some presentations before on rate making and kind of used the city of Detroit back in the 5 years ago that they didn't do any shut-offs, that they continued to just let customers rack up bills and they weren't taking any action. Well, now we're being required in some cases by state law to run our utilities that way. And how do we recover from that down the line is going to be a big question. So we're going to do another poll. Paul, if you get this ready for us.
Yes, I'm ready this time.
Okay. This next one is, how are we going to deal with hardships? How are you currently planning to deal with hardships that your customers are facing? Is it business as usual, or are you continuing to deal with delinquencies and shutoffs? Have you done what we're seeing to be pretty common is at least stopping all disconnects and penalties for the remainder of the COVID crisis? Option number 3 is providing some kind of additional program, or maybe you have another option altogether. If you go ahead and respond to this poll, we'd appreciate it.
It looks like we're getting some good activity here. So again, I appreciate it if you guys you just take a moment on that WebEx panel under the polling. If you just make your answer and hit submit, and we'll just keep it open here just for a few more seconds. And okay, so I am about 15 more seconds here. I'm closing the poll. WebEx allows just some last minute entries there, and I'll be able to show those results again. Okay. Just a flag. Thank you again for doing that. I'm going to show some poll results here. So it looks like business as usual is about 3%. Stopping all disconnects and penalties was about 40% of you. Providing additional programs was 5%, and then we have about a 3% of other. And then we just definitely had some people that not participating, but that's totally fine. So that's what we got. So thanks, Glenn.
All right. So we're going to move on to the last section, the new normals here, things that we might expect. When is this thing going to start slowing down? So far, we're still climbing exponentially. I know we're close to flattening out, like we've seen in some of the other governments. Even Italy is starting to slow down a little bit. Yeah, the president has since pulled off. I developed a slide, a few days ago before he, announced that maybe Easter wasn't going to be the end of this thing, but clearly that's not going to be the end. Ohio right now, the latest model shows this thing running pretty hard throughout April and into May. And what we need to do is continue to update our pandemic plan, communicate regularly with both our staff and with the public. You got to keep your personnel isolated. And we got to think about financial implications going forward. So I think I told you before we had a good 2019. Well, our fiscal year actually ends this month. We have a May 1st beginning of the new fiscal year. So what is this going to mean going forward? Right now, we're not charging any penalties. We expect there may be some reduced consumption demand by customers, and we are doing the bill credit, like I mentioned, the hardship program. So I probably shouldn't be telling our bank this, but for the first time ever in my career, we're actually going to show a proposed budget that is several $100,000 in the red going forward. Just for the next fiscal year, we're really hopeful that this thing will sort itself out by the end of 2020. But you better start thinking about this. That means budget cuts, what that's going to mean for your particular utility, but the chance of everything continuing, to bounce back and things just get right back on track and finishing up the year kind of where you thought you were going to seems fairly unlikely. Look to DC for some help too. They've passed some stimulus packages already. They're talking about another one, maybe a package number 4 that may have some specific things that they could provide to the water industry, specifically through EPA or USDA and others. What kind of help can we expect? Well, first off, I'd recommend everybody kind of track what you're doing related to the COVID through FEMA. There's probably a pretty decent chance there'll be an opportunity for some reimbursement through a FEMA program. I think RD has already talking to the USDA, the Rural Development Program, talking about providing some help at the very least, not requiring some payments, but they might even be willing to do some negotiate some lower rates or something along that line to continue to help out the industry. Our friends at CoBank are very nimble, and they can find ways to get us the resources we need to get us through this. I already mentioned Congress. They passed the $2 trillion, but there may be some more more packages coming later. So that anxiety, let's keep calm. We need to update the pandemic plans, looking weeks ahead. Continue to communicate with the staff and the board and the customers. And think about what things are going to change, when we finally do come out of this thing on the other side. I think it's going to be a more virtual world. We know now at Delco Water that we can conduct a lot of business from home going forward. So we're getting ready to do some expansion of some of our buildings where we may be able to cut down on maybe some of the office space we need if we're able to take advantage of some of that technology. We can do these virtual meetings. And I've always thought it was kind of humorous these last many years of all the people in a room kind of sitting next to each other, but all being on their own independent personal electronic device. Maybe it's just getting started on that. Did want to remind you that we're planning on having these weekly sessions as part of the Association of Regional Water Organizations. If you're interested, again, you need to email Jim Morris or myself or anyone associated with the organization. Probably get on the website and contact us through that. And I think that's all the material that are prepared for you today. I really appreciate the opportunity to share what I've learned over the last few weeks about a pandemic response plan, something that was not in our arsenal prior to January 1 of 2020. Paul,
hey, Glenn,
any questions?
Looks like I have I got a couple questions that have come through. One question is, are Delco employees that are working staggered shifts still working a full 40 hours? And then a second tier to that, if not, are they being paid for a full 40 hours?
That is a great question, and one that all your employees are going to know too. In our case, we're doing salary continuation for everyone, really regardless of the circumstance. So folks, typically what you're seeing with like the distribution folks working the staggering shifts, it's difficult for a lot of them to be able to work from home on the off days. That type of work just doesn't lend itself too much to telecommuting. So they're probably working close to 24, 30 hours a week and getting paid for a 40-hour week. The management team, like myself, I'm coming into the office one day and then staying home the next day, but I'm telecommuting, so I'm still putting in a full salaried week. But we have some folks that are in that category of having some kind of pre-existing condition that makes them susceptible. And if they're not able to telecommute, they're not able to be productive at home, we're still paying them for a 40-hour week. Now, we have been able to take care of a couple, some of those challenges by providing a scanning project. We're planning on doing, converting some of our office to a paperless office. We were able to go out and obtain a couple of scanners and take them to the homes of those individuals that are homebound, and they're able to get some of that work done for us as an alternate, something that they don't need to be connected, don't need to telecommute in. But to answer the question, yes, we're still paying everyone for a full 40-hour week.
Great, thanks, Glenn. I got another question that came through here. What do you anticipate the water demand to be, even potentially post-pandemic here?
Well, for Delco Water, we're kind of an exception to a lot of the utilities out there, in that we have an awful lot. We have our customer base is quite affluent, and they do a lot of outdoor lawn sprinkling, outdoor water use in the summer months. And the reason we had this great 2019 that we're able to share back with our members is because there was an awful lot of sprinkling going on in 2019 and ended up building up our reserves. So I do anticipate that, that outdoor water use demand to go down. So we're expecting maybe about a 0.5% or 1% drop in revenue based on just reduced demand, and that doesn't take into account for the fact of those that may not be able to pay the bills that they're getting just for the indoor domestic use. But I would expect it to drop somewhere between maybe 3% and 5%, and depending on if outdoor water use might go down significantly because that's more of an optional use versus the indoor domestic.
Great, Glenn. I got another question just to kind of clarify about Delco specifically. And you said you were a nonprofit utility. What is your IRS destination? Is it 501c?
Yeah, we're a 501c12 Basically, it's very similar to a rural electric co-op, but obviously we're serving water instead of electric, but funded on the same IRS designation as a rural electric co-op.
Just another question came through. If the situation escalates, how do you plan on keeping your operators safe?
Well, that's a great question, and I think ultimately I'm not anywhere near ready to pull the trigger on this, but ultimately it could be the sequestering. We've got some air mattresses. We've stocked up our emergency provisions, and the thought would be probably we would have 2 or maybe 3, but probably 2 operators stay sequestered in a plant for a week at a time, and then send them home. And they have 2 others that hopefully are healthy, that they've been staying sequestered in their home, and they can step in and take the next week where they're kind of rotating those shifts. And we've actually have gone far enough to start asking the operations team, the plant operations team, who would be willing to volunteer up front for this. We have some folks that have a bigger hardship, have more responsibilities at home than others. So we have started asking for volunteers in case it should come to that. The other tactics I kind of mentioned already is maybe even reducing the hours of operation. Might have to get some assistance from the Ohio EPA on some of the regulatory things on that too, but reducing the hours of operation, reducing the hours we have an operator on hand. We might be able to do some of this stuff via remote control and SCADA if we're able to get some relief from Ohio EPA. And I assume if it got down to that level of challenge within the state of Ohio, we probably would see that kind of relief come our way too. Those are the big picture things. I think at the end of the day, the biggest challenge would be actually sequestering operators, something that we're not ready to do yet, but it's certainly on our radar as a way we need to go in the future.
Perfect. Thanks, Glenn. I had another question come through, and you guys keep them coming. This is exactly what this platform is all about. So another question came through saying, in your new budget that you have done, do you have a time period indicated where you will start laying off people? What are in your budget cuts, and have you communicated this to your staff yet?
Well, at least for the 2021 fiscal year, right? So our fiscal year starts May 1st of 20 and will run through April 30th of 21. So for that fiscal year, we have enough in reserves that we're not going to do any layoffs. We really had a great 2019. So we're operating off that reserve pool, and I've actually talked to the board specifically and said, you need to think about this instead of as a year where we're going to lose money in fiscal year 21, do your best to think of it as a 2-year budget, right? Starting of May 1st of 2019 up through April 30th of 2021. And over those 2 years, we think we'll still be in the black. But that puts us in a luxurious position that I know not a lot of utilities are in, and certainly not a lot of rural and regional utilities are in, where they've got enough revenue in 1 year that they could actually take, a 4 or 5% hit the next year. So it may mean different things for you. I know I heard from City of Columbus that they expect revenues to be down significantly, and they're looking they may need to do some budget cuts there. We know that the governor for the state of Ohio has asked all his departments to look at cutting 20%. And there's no way to cut 20% out of a budget without doing some significant, meaningful cuts that are going to hurt people and also hurt programs. So that's my answer is at least for the rest of 20, we could have a pretty tough year and we'd still be okay. But if it rolls into a 2-year cycle, well, then we're going to have to start figuring out what we're going to cut in order to make this thing work. But for this next fiscal year, I think we're all right.
Great, thanks, Glenn. Did have a comment come through that somebody wanted to share just regarding the 501c3, or I'm sorry, the 501c12. Just so the audience knows, this 501c12 utilities are excluded from the PPP grant program and the CARES grant program. And they're encouraging you all to contact your congressional delegation to get this corrected. So that's just a comment somebody just made. I appreciate that. And then one lighthearted question for you, Glenn, is what is your favorite football team?
Well, it depends on if you mean my favorite football team is the one. In fact, I'm not so sure that this whole COVID thing isn't all made up just so that the Buckeyes can't go win the championship next year. I think that might be a back-ended action that they're trying to do. That probably is a comment for somebody in Iowa or Illinois, but yeah, we're sports fans around here. And in fact, I remember telling my wife when they canceled the Arnold Classic, I said, well, that's a big deal. If once they start canceling Buckeye games, then we'll know things for real. Because as great as my Ohio State Buckeyes are at playing football and other sports, they're better at making money. They do not like to shut down athletic revenue at all. And so once I saw some of those tournaments were canceled along with the NBA and other stuff, I said, this is life like we've never seen before. This is something that's never come along, and you're going to have to figure out what this new normal is going to be like.
Very good. Thanks, Glenn. I couldn't help myself to ask at least a lighthearted question at this point. And then, Jim, you mentioned that you might want to just say some final comments. We are potentially running to the end of our webinar today. So again, if anybody has any questions, please still ask that through the chat feature. But Jim, why don't you go ahead and make your final remarks?
All right. Thanks, Paul. And great job, Glenn. Thank you. So as we've done in the past, we will send out a PDF file of the slide deck. So if you're interested in pulling this back up later in the next day or two here, there'll be a PDF of the slide deck. And then as we get a recording of the actual webinar pulled together, we'll also provide that link to you as well, so you can share it with yourself again or to other people that you want to see what was talked about today. I'll also throw in there that you can also email me, go to the website, www.arwo.org, and send comments or questions to us. We're interested in hearing from all of you on future topics of webinars that you may want to hear from, and we're interested in providing information to you as you feel the need for it. So again, copies of the slide deck, recorded presentation, and if you've got comments for other ideas, please send them to me. Thanks again to the CoBank team and Delco and Glenn for putting this on today. Paul, back to you.
Great. Glenn, do you have any final remarks? And we'll go ahead and wrap up from there.
No, I'm just pleased to see such great interest in this. We're thankful for CoBank continuing to be a leader in the industry and helping us share this word, helping us reach out to our membership and maybe potential future members with this information, which is so timely and so needed right now. Ask people to continue, consider continuing the conversation. We're going to have these meetings going forward on Thursday afternoons, starting next week, at least for the month of April. With that, I just thanks for your attendance today.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jim, and thanks, Glenn. I just wanted to share a comment that was just made, saying thank you for presenting. This is definitely a challenging topic, so I think people are really showing their appreciation for your time and putting this together, and it seems to be very helpful, and I think everyone is appreciative. So thanks, you guys. We're going to go ahead and wrap this up and conclude. And like Jim said, he'll have that slide deck and recording of the webinar. It does take several days to render out, so it may not be till early or mid next week until that webinar recording gets out, but we could potentially get the slide deck out to you sooner. So thank you for joining us today, and we'll conclude today's webinar. Thanks, guys.